Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode on Swish City, where we're going through the NBA Power Rankings, ranking each team from 30 to 1. If you guys have missed the series so far, we've already broken down an abundance of teams. But in today's episode, we're going to be looking at one specific team in the Western Conference that had some injury news today that definitely dropped them down a bit. As you guys can tell from the thumbnail, we're going to be discussing the San Antonio Spurs this afternoon. We're going to be going over their additions, their subtractions, some players I like that are fitting in with this young culture, some players that I don't necessarily think could fit in with this culture, could benefit in other places, then finishing it off with my overall record prediction for the team. Without further ado, let's get into the video at hand. Thank you guys so much for showing your support. Now, like I said in the introduction, we're going to be going over the moves the San Antonio Spurs made over the offseason. And some of the teams that we've already broken down have made more moves than the San Antonio Spurs team, with only making 6 moves so far this season. This offseason, excuse me. They did bring back 2 players, and they decided to bring back the likes of Charles Bassey and Sandro Mamukevishvili, both on 1-year deals. Both were young players that necessarily weren't key starters or key replacements in their rotation, but were depth pieces used by the Spurs in case of injuries or just in case of different matchups or if they were tanking towards the end of the season. And both Sandro Mamukevishvili and Charles Bassey have both shown likeness for the Spurs in that front court to make them and keep them. Now, they did add 2 players as well. They did go out and add Harrison Barnes via trade with the San Antonio Spurs. And they also went out and got Chris Paul on a 1-year deal. Now, their departures, they did trade Devontae Graham away to the Charlotte Hornets in a move to save some salary cap to get this deal for Harrison Barnes done to be that third team to help facilitate that DeMar DeRozan deal. And also, they lost Dominic Barlow as he departed in free agency to the Atlanta Hawks. So, when looking at this team, courtesy of Spot Track, courtesy of Keith Smith, NBA, absolute fantastic reporter covering the NBA, we can see that this roster is a little bit differently constructed than some of the other teams. In the last couple teams we've been looking at, we've been seeing, hey, their rosters are filled with a lot of veterans or players that maybe aren't their best players towards the top of the money making for this team. But for the Spurs, it's a little bit different here. We can see that some of their top players are some of their most paid players. Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, 2 of their younger players that they have bought into, have given into. They are their 2 highest paid players. Harrison Barnes, Zach Collins, and Chris Paul also rounding out as good veterans for this team. And then obviously, as we know, Victor Wembanyama, their number 1 overall pick last season, the guy that's supposed to change the game for them. And Stephon Castle, their first-round pick this year, will definitely make some noise. They also have some other young players: Trey Jones, Jeremy Sohan, Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley, City Sissoko, who was their first-round pick. And I think that the Spurs have an abundance of young talent. When looking at Exhibit 10s and 2-way contracts as well, they did bring in Malachi Flynn and Brandon Boston Jr., both who have shown to be able to play at the NBA level. Brandon Boston with the Los Angeles Clippers, Malachi Flynn dropping 50 points for the Pistons last year, but most notably playing for the Toronto Raptors for a majority of his career. I believe that both of these players can be fantastic G League players, but maybe even guys that could earn 2-way spots, or with this Spurs team in the direction that they're going, kind of being towards the bottom of the Western Conference with it being so stacked, maybe if they want to rebuild, want to tank, could utilize some of these guys in their rotation and for their future as they want to develop their franchise. I think guys like Malachi Flynn could be a fantastic veteran, not a veteran point guard, but for this team, a veteran point guard to help hone in some skills and teach some young guys some stuff while also growing. And Brandon Boston can insert himself into that wing group if he is to break out. I think that they have a lot of great depth, a lot of great young stars. I think the Spurs team is definitely exciting, enticing, and something to be looking at. The only issue is obviously that the Western Conference is stacked with powerhouses and teams that are ready to compete, even though the Spurs might have the framework or potential to be able to compete with guys like Victor Wembanyama, who looks absolutely insane as the number 1 overall draft pick and looks like he's going to change the game at the center position. Players like Jeremy Sohan, Malachi Branham, Devin Vassell, City Sissoko, all players that they drafted, Stephon Castle, they have the framework to build it. It's just not ready to take off yet. It's going to take a couple more years. Take some of these top tier teams or teams that are maybe at the end of their cycle to strip down, rebuild, fully tank for the Spurs to kind of make some noise. So let's look at some players that I think are going to be very interesting for this Spurs team this season, and diving into some players that I like, and then also looking at some players that I'm not biggest fan of with this system. So first player that we're going to be diving in and talking about was that big acquisition, this free agency, where the Spurs went out and got Chris Paul to be their point guard for this team coming in this season. And he's someone that I'm really, really looking towards for this team. The rumors of Chris Paul going to the Spurs started all the way back at last season when he was traded from the Phoenix Suns to the Washington Wizards for Bradley Beal. Everybody knew he wasn't going to stay on the Wizards. Everybody knew he still wanted to be a starting point guard somewhere. And it was just ultimately where was he going to find himself on a big contract. Unfortunately, for Chris Paul and for the Wizards. He was then shipped out for Jordan Poole to the Warriors for the Warriors to get off his long-term contract for the future. And Chris Paul was just an immediate bump at that $40 million for just that one season. Didn't work for Paul over in Golden State in a log jam backcourt with Curry and Klay Thompson in a role that he would have liked to started, but would have never really fit in with that roster, and also a team that he had severe injuries suffered with this Warriors team as well. Wasn't fully healthy, wasn't fully there, and a lot of fans were starting to give up on Chris Paul, similarly to how they did when he was in Houston. But I see Chris Paul going to Oklahoma City or going to San Antonio, similar to like how he went to Oklahoma City just a few seasons back, going there on a limb, really helping to go help and better a young team and show these guys this culture. He matured. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander showed the Thunder that they could make a playoff push and compete in the playoffs when they were supposed to be basically a nothing burger in the Western Conference. And I still think he can bring that types of qualities to this San Antonio Spurs team. Let's not forget the Spurs do have young point guard in Tre Jones and just drafted Stephon Castle this draft this year. So they have young guards and young talent that Chris Paul can show to utilize how to play make, how to facilitate, how to be that true point guard, as we all know Chris Paul is, but also in the immediate effect, helping out Victor Wembanyama, helping him out as that playmaker, helping him out as that scorer, because that was one of the key things that the Spurs didn't have last year was this true point guard, this guy that could get Wemby the ball, this guy that could set up this style of offense for Wembanyama. They experimented with Jerry Sohan for a little bit, necessarily wasn't really working because they had already some bigger lineups. They experimented with Tre Jones, and I feel like he's more of a secondary point guard and a bench backup point guard. I think Chris Paul, he can insert himself to be the starting point guard, especially for a team like the Spurs, once again, in this competent Western Conference, isn't pushing, they are pushing for a playoff spot, but isn't necessarily gifted a playoff spot, isn't necessarily understood to have a playoff spot. I think these are key things for the Spurs to kind of work and develop on. Bring Chris Paul in, having mentored those younger guys, even if he's still the starter this year, and still help out Victor Wembanyama as well. And also with Chris Paul, if you guys don't know, with the new CBA, the new restrictions, there is a certain level of a tax grid where if you are making a certain amount of money, if you were to get bought out or waived, you cannot sign to certain second apron teams, where Chris Paul is under that threshold. That means that if Chris Paul were to want to contend, if he were to revitalize his career, show that he could be an impact player on a playoff caliber or championship-esque team, the Spurs could either trade him to any team that they would like, or they could waive him and he could sign basically anywhere, with the second half of the season, them developing their other younger guards. Honestly, I don't necessarily know if it will go that way, but for the Spurs, for Chris Paul, it is a win-win regardless. Chris Paul gets to start with San Antonio, gets to play on a team he was rumored to go to last year, help out some guards in Stephon Castle and Tre Jones, really understand what it is to be a point guard position, help out Victor Wembanyama and explore that culture, and also get to play with Greg Popovich. Absolutely fantastic things for Chris Paul to add to his resume. And for the Spurs, it's a point guard that's being added that can help grow your center, your cornerstone, your future piece, while also helping out the other stepping stones in their way of growth. I really love this move by the San Antonio Spurs. I think it was an absolute slam dunk of a move. Let's dive in and talk about the next player, though, that I'm really, really high on with this team, and that's Malachi Branham. Now, Malachi Branham has, again, been a very nice microwave scorer for this San Antonio Spurs team off the bench. Coming from Ohio State, he came into the NBA not really highly profiled or really known as going to be a real true impact player, but man, oh man, did he find his role with San Antonio. And I think he could be that spark plug, that scorer off the bench that this team needs. They have Harrison Barnes inserted into that starting lineup to have some shooting and scoring at the wing position. Most likely going to run Keldon Johnson off the bench once again. My projected starting lineup for this team is going to be Chris Paul, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, Victor Wembanyama, and I think Malachi Branham and Keldon Johnson are going to be the first two off the bench. And I think that will be exceptional for the Spurs. Malachi Branham is going to be that spark plug, that scorer, that extra oomph of offense that you're going to need on the bench. I'm really, really happy to see how he can translate that this season, and I'm very, very excited to see how he can take over. But talking about Malachi Branham and talking about how he's going to be an impact player off the bench might be just a little bit too nice to say, because Malachi Branham might even be starting this year, and that's all because of recent news regarding around Devin Vassell. So I do not have a player for the San Antonio Spurs that I dislike. I like every player on this Spurs team, specifically Sandro Mamakevich, because he went to Seton Hall, my alma mater. But Devin Vassell is the one player I want to talk to in concerning news with the Spurs, even though there's a player I don't like. News came out today that Devin Vassell has an injury in his foot and might miss the start of the season. With news like this is not good for a rebuilding team, a young team, and a Spurs team, especially for Devin Vassell, one of their young, high-profiling players, their best young scorer on this roster, and arguably number 2 option for this Spurs team in their rebuild. So having him go down is not good already for the start of the season for the Spurs. And why knock them down a little bit lower as well in this recording here? I do think Wembanyama, Chris Paul, they have all the intangibles to be good. They have some good key role players. They have some good young guys. But with losing a player in Devin Vassell for who knows how long to the start of the season, that could not be great. Now, like I mentioned, a player in Malachi Branham could step up, could deliver, could be that X factor piece at that guard position to where they have no issues, no worries. Maybe a little bit of a question mark as that backup bench scorer, but I think that it's going to be a big glaring issue for this Spurs team, and it's not going to help them get any more wins in the win category. So, like I said, like I broke down, I like Malachi Branham. I like the Spurs team. I like Sandro Mamakevich as well. Went to Seton Hall. I think could be a nice young big to kind of grow in that system. Even if he's behind Wembanyama, even if he's behind Zach Collins, third big is always nice to have. He can be that. But like I said, nobody that I dislike on the Spurs team. Very young, very exciting, very fun, and a team that I will definitely be watching on YouTube TV 24/7. But before we sign out, before we say sayonara to the San Antonio Spurs, let's look at their record prediction, ladies and gentlemen. And I got the Spurs finishing at 31-51. That's right. They are doing exceptionally better compared to their record last season, and that's with the addition of these veterans. Like I said, bringing in Harrison Barnes as a scorer, you might think Harrison Barnes doesn't move the needle or do much for a playoff championship team, but for a young team, a rebuilding team that needs that added shooting, needs that veteran wing presence to help grow players like Keldon Johnson and Jeremy Sohan, but also that veteran experience to help them win games or for him to hit a big shot when it counts. Let's not forget that Harrison Barnes is still a fantastic shooter, still a fantastic wing defender, even if he's getting up there in age. He can still be a quality role player and help out a team as that fourth, fifth option. He might not be a third option anymore, but he definitely could be a fourth or fifth option. And with the San Antonio Spurs team, they need those types of players. So inserting him and Chris Paul into this starting lineup, if Devin Vassell is ready to go, if Wembanyama is ready to go, if Sohan is ready to go, it's a pretty solid starting 5 with a bench lineup. Obviously, if I had to give you my predictions, I'm looking at here, we can see Zach Collins coming off the bench, most likely Stephon Castle, Trey Jones, Malachi Branham, and maybe a look at like Blake Wesley or City Sissoko, depending on how they feel if they want to give their young guy the option or not. But ultimately, the Spurs team finishing at 31-51 does kind of creep up, is going to be ranked as the third worst team in the Western Conference, but not third worst team overall in the NBA. I lost track of the number count, so fortunately I do not know. I believe we're at team 8, I believe, at this point. So let me know what you think down below in the comment section. If you've been paying attention watching these videos, I really do appreciate it. If this is the first one you've tuned into looking to the San Antonio Spurs, check out the previous videos. We've been breaking down all these teams in their power rankings, going from rank 30 all the way to rank 1 for the start of the season. We're chipping away day by day, so you don't want to miss out on that. So if you enjoy the content, enjoy what we're putting here over on Swish City, I appreciate it. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It really does mean the world as I revitalize this channel, trying to bring it back. Like I said, we got the power ranking previews coming out for the preseason. Once the regular season starts, we're going to have news updates, breakdowns, all that stuff revolving around the NBA on this channel. So if you like the content, if you enjoy my personality, check it out. If you want to find me out on my socials, follow me on Twitter at Bruce Velez to get all my Twitter updates on everything NBA. Check out my other NBA channels as well, Celtics Digest, Suns Digest. All the links will be found at the Twitter. Once again, I appreciate all of you. You guys have been absolutely fantastic tuning in and showing your love. Catch you guys in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Peace out, everybody.